Yes.
You remember him?
Oh, yes.
There were people who were wondering why I spent so much time with him in Shadow Victory. Well, the reason I spent so much time with him is that he winds up on Manticore having a conversation with Honor Harrington, who's there to evaluate. He's like, I was told I would be speaking to like a highly skilled, highly trained interrogator. She says, no, just me. And afterwards, she is evaluating him for Elizabeth and whatnot, and she comes to the conclusion that he's an honest craftsman. Okay, he never really wanted to go to work for the alignment. If you go back and look about how he wound up working for the alignment, it was like, okay, well, people are trying to kill me and you can keep me alive. Let me think. Okay, and he really didn't care. You find out that he was like 8 or 9 when Frontier Security came for his home system, and he got off the planet when he was 19 by joining the gendarmerie. And he's done what he's done ever since, because that's what you do. In a lot of ways, he's kind of like Tande Lane was before she got hooked up with the Portuguese, if you think about it. And Honor is like, we really need to turn him around and get him on our side. So there's this guy who's interrogating him with the aid of a treecat who's kind of, listening. So what can you tell me about this? The orange-haired man consulted his notes. Colin Detweiler. He looked up, his peculiar purple eyes with their vertical pupils showing only mild curiosity. We're trying to fill in the gaps about the alignment. Fill in the gaps, Damien Harahat thought sardonically. What you mean is you people don't have a clue who Detweiler is, and little red ants are eating you alive while you try to figure out what the hell the alignment is really up to. He leaned back in his own chair, pursing his lips with a thoughtful air. He was still far from certain why he hadn't conveniently dropped dead, conveniently for his most recent employers, that was. Although the most likely answer remained the Gamma Center's destruction. It seemed, assuming there was any truth to the Mason claims, that he owed Anton Zilwicki and Victor Kasha a vote of thanks. He actually does, because everybody assumed he'd gotten the nanotech, which he never did. Actually, he'd like to discuss quite a few things with Zilwicki and Kasha. He admired professionalism, whoever happened to have it, and the two of them had ripped a lot of scabs off of things. Isabel Bardesano and Colin Detweiler, among others, had very much wanted to stay hidden. Besides, he'd like to compare notes with them about Green Pines, given his post-terrorist attack visit to Mindel. Unfortunately, they weren't available. For that matter, he hadn't been able to figure out what their true relationship with their respective star nations' intelligence services really was. It sounded like Zilwicki was essentially a free agent whose primary loyalty was split between the Kingdom of the Torch and the Star Kingdom, now Star Empire, in which he'd been born. And it sounded like Kasha was essentially a loose warhead, officially in the employ of the Republic of Haven's Foreign Intelligence Service, whose directives he followed on the infrequent occasions when they made sense to him. I'm afraid I actually only met Detweiler twice, Mr. Joubert, he said after a moment to his current interrogator. So you said earlier, Antoine Joubert tapped the memo pad on the table between them and smiled. When he did, he showed very pointy teeth, the product of the same genetic manipulation which had given his genetic slave grandfather his dark complexion, bright orange, not red or auburn hair, and cat-like pupils. It would seem like both these meetings were rather significant in terms of your employment, though. That's a fair assessment, Harahat nodded and glanced at the tree cat stretched comfortably across one end of the table. Aside from the angle of their pupils and the fact that they were green, not purple, its eyes reminded him a great deal of Joubert's. By the way, Joubert's tree cat name is People's Eyes. Not least because of how unwaveringly they were focused upon one Damien Harahat. Unless he was mistaken, there was more, a lot more, intelligence behind them than he previously assumed. There's not a lot I can tell you about him that's what I'd call concrete, he said. I never saw any organization charts, much less one with his name on it. And once I'd passed muster with him, I never saw him again either. So please understand that anything I tell you can only be conjectural based on my one-time impression of him. He paused, eyebrows raised, and Joubert nodded. Understood, he said in the tone of one professional speaking to another one. With that proviso, then, Harahap continued, he's smart, very smart. Let's see. Thanks to the cataract surgery, I have like really interesting bifocals. He's also ruthless, and he comes equipped with a lot of focus and, I think, genuine commitment to whatever these people are really after. Physically, the cyber sketch your people produced from my description is pretty accurate, but it doesn't capture how much, call it command presence he has, or the fact that he has a command mentality as well. Harahap shrugged. I'd say he's a man who makes decisions, not one who takes directions. Joubert glanced at the treecat, who only yawned daintily, showing teeth that were another point of similarity between them. That's an interesting distinction, the Manticoran observed after a moment. Well, I guess I should admit it's based, at least in part, on Chernikov's attitude towards him. That would be Chernishev. That would be Rufino Chernishev, the fellow who wound up with Bardesano's job? Joubert asked, and Harahap nodded. He felt a twinge, a tiny one, of regret at having ID'd Rufino for the Manties, but the Mason was a fellow professional. He'd understand. That wouldn't stop him from shooting Harahap right in the head if the opportunity arose, but he would understand. Yes, he said, neither he nor Bardesano ever used the term Mason alignment to me or in my presence, but assuming your people are right about its existence, and if you are, that might explain some of the things I found puzzling about their strategies. I'm pretty sure Bardesano was in charge of its covert operations. I don't know anything about their intelligence gathering activities, except that from the raw take I studied on the systems they assigned to me, they're tapped into official league sources at a very high levels. The intel they provided me was better than the gendarmerie usually comes up with, and they obviously had sources outside the official ones as well. How those contacts were established or managed was never part of the intel package, though, so I can't say if she was involved in that side, or if she was only their director of operations. From her attitude, from some of the things she said, I'm inclined to think she had executive responsibility for both sides of their shop, intelligence and covert ops, but there's no way I could confirm that. The important thing, though, he leaned forward, is that whatever her role may have been, Detweiler was her boss. So if you're right about the existence of the alignment, and it really isn't the consortium of transstellars he and Bardesano tried to sell me, I think he's very probably the shadow government's Minister of Intelligence. Interesting possibility, Joubert said. I want to come back to that in a bit, but for now, tell me what you can about the shift in Chernyshev's responsibilities after Green Pines. For example, I wish I thought we really could turn that man into an asset, Patricia Gibbons said, almost wistfully. She sat in a secure conference room between Hamish Alexander Harrington and his brother William, who happened to be Baron Granville, not to mention Prime Minister of Manticore. At the moment, all of them were watching another installment of Damien Harahap's ongoing debrief by Barton Salgado's Special Intelligence Service. Personally, Gibbons thought Owen I ought to have the lead role, given that it was a naval officer who'd scooped him up in the first place. On the other hand, she had more than enough on her own plate, especially in the wake of Hypatia, and the reports beginning to come in from other systems who'd been visited by the Sally's goddamn buccaneers. Yes, they don't like Operation Buccaneer. He's a trained, skilled intelligence operative, not a scientist sequestered in a think tank or even doing applied research, he went on. That means he's already given us at least 3 or 4 times more on the operational side than Dr. Simoe was able to, assuming we can rely on him. The dappled tree cat on Whitehaven's shoulder produced something that sounded remarkably like a human sigh, and the cat on the back of Gibbons' chair laughed. The Admiral looked over her shoulder at her furry bodyguard with a frown, then turned back to the 2-legged participants in the conference. Despite Samantha's and Thought Chaser's reactions, she said a bit tartly, I am not suggesting he's getting any intentional deception past pounces on leads. She twitched her head at the treecat participating in the recorded interrogation. My problem is that I still can't quite convince myself, not fully, that he isn't some kind of plant, even if he doesn't know it. Oh, Pat, the Prime Minister sighed, I swear you are the most paranoid person I've ever met. He considered him, well, the most paranoid, otherwise sane person I've ever met. Part of my job, she pointed out. Besides, her expression darkened, don't forget how long these bastards have played every intelligence agency in the galaxy. They got away with it partly because none of us paranoid but sane people were paranoid enough to believe in tooth fairies, Easter bunnies, honest politicians, no offense, Mr. Prime Minister, sir, or secret societies of genetic supermen hell-bent on galactic domination. She shook her head. Honestly, most mornings I wake up and have to convince myself all over again that this alignment really exists. That even though a lot of their successes to date stems from the fact that the entire concept is so patently absurd, no serious analyst ever thought of looking for it. Nobody keeps something this broad, this ambitious, hidden for as long as Simoes and McBride's information suggests these people have been around, without being very, very good. Crazy, megalomaniacal fanatics too bug-fuck crazy to come in out of the snow, maybe, but good at concealment, misdirection, and misinformation. The fact that I can't see any way they could have deliberately planted him on us doesn't mean they couldn't do it. More to the point, it doesn't mean they didn't deliberately mislead him as a security measure just in case he fell into our hands and decided to get talkative. You don't buy Honor's theory about that? Whitehaven asked mildly. I didn't say that, Gibbons shook her head. Actually, I think she may well be right about why he's alive. I'm just saying these people believe in defense in depth. Everything we've seen tells me the alignment's like one of those Matryoshka dolls Charlie O'Daly gave Moira last year for her 10th birthday. Every time we take one of them apart, there's something else hiding inside it. I don't see any reason to assume they didn't hide in something else inside whatever Harahap knows about. Clearly they did, Whitehaven said, or tried to anyway. Nobody ever said anything to him about genetically enhanced conspirators out to overthrow the League. He figured out on his own that they were really after a lot more than they were telling him about. But they were damned careful they didn't find out what they hadn't told him. In fact, I think your Matryoshka doll is actually a very good metaphor for their entire operation. That's why I also think Honor's right about how useful it can be. He's at least 2 or 3 dolls in from the edge. That gives us a lot better starting point for the next doll, assuming she's also right about whether or not we can genuinely turn him. Turn him again, you mean? Gibbons' tone was rather pointed, and she snorted when the Earl shrugged. Man's probably getting vertigo by now. Maybe, but I come back to Pounces on Leaves. He and Nimitz both agree with Honor's evaluation of Harahap's basic personality. I know, but, Pat, the decision's been made, Prime Minister Granville pointed out. She looked at him and he shrugged. Her Majesty signed off of it, and so has Tom Theismann for Eloise Pritchard and Michael Mayhew for Protector Benjamin, he reminded her in a reasonable tone. All of them understand and respect her reservations, but he's way too potentially valuable for us to just park in a holding cell and trot out for occasional interrogations. That wasn't precisely all I intended to do with him, Gibbons said tartly. It was her turn to shrug. On the other hand, you're right, I know it. I just would really, really like some way to be sure he doesn't get a better offer from someone else down the road, flip again, and sell us out the same way he's selling out the alignment. I wouldn't say that's exactly what he's doing, Whitehaven observed, then chuckled. Mind you, I can see where an established pattern of behavior on his part might seem like the grounds for a certain degree of concern to a professionally paranoid woman such as yourself. I cannot tell you how relieved I am that you find that amusing, my lord, Vice Admiral Patricia Gibbons told the civilian head of her service. Oh, I don't find your suspicion or your awareness of the potential risk amusing at all, Whitehaven assured her. What I find amazing is the thought of Mr. Harahap's response to the prophylactic measure Honor suggested to prevent anything like that from happening. Prophylactic. That's how I think of it anyway. He smiled at her. Then his expression turned slightly more serious. You've met Dame Lisa Lorenz, haven't you? Gibbons frowned as she rummaged through her memory, then she nodded, although from her expression she wondered where he could possibly be going. I wouldn't say I really know Dame Lisa, she said. I saw her dance before she retired, several times really, but to be honest, Simon and Myra both love ballet more than I do. I know she and Honor are close too, and you're right, I did meet her a couple of months ago when Thought Chaser and I were on Sphinx. I'm not really clear on what she could contribute to our little problem here, though. Dame Lisa Lorenz had risen to the rank of second principal dancer in the Royal Ballet's company of Sphinx, a position she'd held for close to 25 tea years. That quarter tea century is one of the 4 best ballet dancers in the entire Star Kingdom. There was no company of Griffin, which led to all manners of snarky jokes. Had ended with the Iwata strike, however. She'd been headed toward retirement well before that, despite the fact that she remained in high demand as a performer and an artist. She and her treecat, Grace, had been deeply involved in Adelina Arif's quest to teach treecats how to communicate with humans, however, and that had been claiming more and more of her time. She'd made her 2 careers work, somehow, yet the strain had mounted as her heart pulled her, as her heart pulled her in opposing directions. It was probable she would have followed her heart into full-time work with Dr. Arif under any circumstances, but the Iwata strike had tipped the balance. The Sphinx Company had been scheduled to perform in Iwata Crossing. A third of the company had already arrived to begin rehearsals, and the shuttle delivering Dame Lisa and the rest of the company had been less than 30 minutes out when the tsunami struck and killed every member of the company already on the ground. She and Grace had left the world of dance after the deaths of so many people, human and treecat alike, and not just the members of their company they'd known so well and loved so much, in order to dedicate themselves fully to the rapidly evolving relationship between the cats and their 2-legged neighbors. Well, Honor's put quite a bit of thought into your little problem, Hamish said now, and I think she's come up with a workable solution. She asked Dr. Arif and her team for a nominee, and Dame Lisa and the memory singers came up with one. Well, came up with one I think will work very well. His name is Clean Killer. Gibbons stared at it for a moment, then burst out laughing. His very own treecat bodyguard? She demanded. Well, if he's on the up and up, he's definitely somebody the alignment would move heaven and earth to shut up, assuming they figure out he's alive and we've got him, Whitehaven pointed out. It would make sense to give him a nanodetector to make that as difficult as possible, wouldn't it? Oh, of course it would, Gibbons agreed, still snickering as she turned back to the recording. My, oh my, remind me to compliment your wife the next time I see her. She shook her head. I do like a woman with a devious mind. I fully understand why our 2 legs are so confused about how to, I do not fully understand why our 2 legs are so confused about how to deal with this person, Clean Killer told Thought Chaser. Surely if he is a friend to the evildoers who murdered Blackrock and so many 2 legs, there is only one thing to do with him. True, Thought Chaser replied, looking across from his place on the back of Crafty Mind's sitting place. Crafty Mind is Gibbons.
You think?
Yeah, I have observed that 2 legs do many things people find difficult to understand. Yet I have also discovered that most often they have good reasons. He yawned, a silent smile at the younger cat. Not always, of course. And they are 2 legs. If the people have learned anything about 2 legs over the last hands upon hands of turnings, is that we will never fully understand how their minds work just because we can taste their mind clothes. Clean Killer mind laughed in agreement. No one would ever fully understand 2-leg. That was a given. But he didn't need to understand them to know that, just like the people, there were good 2 legs and there were evil 2 legs, and he knew where his own allegiance lay. His laughter faded as he considered that, thought about why he was here in the huge 2-leg nesting place. A city, they called it, he thought. forming the mouth noise carefully in his mind. The strength of so many hands of mind blows pressed in upon him like some powerful invisible wind, or perhaps like the heat of the sun in midsummer. It threatened to crush him, but he had tasted the memory songs of others of the people who had gone among the two legs. That had prepared him for it, although not so well as he had believed it had before he experienced the reality himself. That first day, he had seriously considered fleeing like a kitten newly escaped from its nesting place, but he had overcome the temptation by remembering why he was here. His older sister, Silverclaw, had mated into the Black Rock clan. She had also died with her mate, her kittens, and her entire new clan family when the fire fell from the heavens. Clean Killer had been near the boundary between Blacklock's range and Mossy Tree clans. Indeed, he had been mind-speaking with her when it happened. And he would never forget that day, never forget her scream of terror brief as the time between two breaths, before that her beloved mind voice vanished into cold, eternal silence. Cut away from him forever with the sharpness of one of the singing blades. Bad when you touch the screen and it does something you didn't want it to do. One of the singing blades the two-legged hunters and scouts used. And then, even as he turned to speed madly through the netwood towards Black Rock's range, the dreadful boil of sun-bright fury had roared up before him, and the terrible thunder rumble and howling wind had raced over him like a mighty storm. The shock had splintered branches all about him, flung him from the netwood like one more broken twig. Indeed, so far as any of the memory singers knew, no one closer to Black Rock's central nesting place than he had survived, and it had taken him many hands and days to heal from the bones which had been broken, even with the two-leg dealer's assistance. It had taken far longer for his mind glow to heal. Heartsinger, Mossy Tree's mind healer, had told him he could survive the deep inner wounds of that day. At first, Clean Killer had shut his own mind to him, refusing to believe the older person. In the end, though, Heartsinger had been right. He had survived it, but he would never be the same again. None of the people would ever be the same. Clean Killer was not the only person who had directly shared that single mind screen from all of Black Rock's people, and by now all of the people, aside from the youngest kittens, had tasted the memory songs of that day. The day Black Rock died, murdered by the evildoers from beyond the sky who had killed so many more of the people's two legs on that same dreadful day. The memory singers had mercifully dimmed the worst of the terror, the agony in their songs, but it was important that all of the people taste them, know the darkness at their core, know their enemies' work, and never forget their hatred for the ones who had done it. Clean Killer needed no memory songs. He carried that darkness with him everywhere. Thanks to Heartsinger, it had not devoured him as it had so many other of the people. Yet he had discovered he could not go back to his everyday life as one of Mossy Tree's scouts. He could no longer roam the netwood and golden leaf, hunting and warding, guarding the clan from death fangs and snow hunters. Not when he knew that other far greater threat hid beyond the stars. And so when the memory singers sent forth the summons seeking volunteers to venture among the two legs and to guard them against the threat they could not taste themselves, the other two legs, who the evildoers somehow compelled to slay even their closest friends, Clean Killer, scout of Mossy Tree clan, was among the first to volunteer. And not just because of his need to protect the two legs who fought to protect all the people in two legs alike of his world. No, he volunteered because he hoped that someday, some way, he could come within claw's reach of at least one of the evildoers responsible for such slaughter, so many deaths, and on the day that he did. He supposed that was why Spins for Joy, Speaks from Silence, and Dances on Clouds had considered him as the protector for this once upon a time evildoer who claimed now to be a friend. Well, Killer would see about that. He had tasted Pounces on Leaves' memory of people's eyes conversations with the captured evildoer, and he knew the evildoer had never said anything which was not true. But that did not fully reassure Killer. Permanent retainers are so much fun. The people had never even considered saying a thing which was not so before they had encountered the two legs and learned to understand their mouth noises. There had been no point, since any person knew whether or not the person mind-speaking with him was doing such an outlandish thing. But two legs were mind-blind, all of them except Dances on Cloud and Cloud Dancer's Joy, her kitten, and just a tiny bit, Deep Roots and Laugh Dancer, her parents. Not only could they say things which were not so, they could not always tell when someone else said such things to them, poor creatures. People could deceive or trick other people. Indeed, some, like Laughs Brightly, were notorious among all the clans for their ability to do that. But they could not do it that easily, not by simply saying false things. They had to find other ways, more creative ways. Was it not reasonable to assume that two legs had more than one way to deceive their own kind as well? Killer had observed that some of the most effective deceptions lay not in the saying of untrue things, but in saying things which were entirely true and did not mean what the other person believed they meant. He did not expect to enjoy his time protecting the evildoer, although the memory song of the Two Legs Mind Glow Sorrow Singer had relayed to him from Pounces on Leaves was much less distasteful than he had initially expected. Pounces on Leaves had a powerful mind glow for a male. Admittedly, he had been more focused on tasting the truth of the evildoer's responses to people's eyes questions than on delving deep into the Two Legs mind glow itself. But the memory he had shared with Sorrow Singer and through her with Killer had carried none of the dark, cold evil Killer had always assumed must mark an evildoer capable of destroying Blackrock Clan and summoning Two Legs. Perhaps it does not, he thought now grimly, as the two-legged flying thing swooped downward toward its destination. But unlike Pounces on Leaves, I will be a hunter. I will be a hunter, stalking that mind glow, and the evildoer who now says he is prepared to aid our two legs will not like what happens if I find treachery within him. Okay, now, I've only got what?
You got 15 minutes.
I got 15, okay, I'm good. Well, okay, I won't go that far. I got time. All right. Damien Harahop felt more unsettled than he would have admitted as he followed his escort, the Manties were too polite to call her a guard, down the hall. He supposed it was a good thing they wanted to keep him alive, at least until they decided differently, and he doubted they were lying about the Nanotech assassins. He had no more idea than they did about how Bardesano's people might have made that work, but it sounded like exactly the sort of thing they would make work. So if this treecat they meant to pair him with could keep that sort of unpleasant encounter from claiming the scalp of one Damien Harahop, that was a good thing. He was less comfortable with why his new protector, Killer, a name which suggested a few unpleasant possibilities, would be able to detect a programmed assassin in time to do something about it. There had been rumors about Sphinxian Treecat's supposed esoteric abilities for a long time, although he'd never been interested enough to chase them down himself. One thing he hadn't heard about them, however, was that they'd learned to communicate with humans. If, as Joubert claimed, they were telepaths able to detect lies and assassins, their ability to tell someone about it explained why Joubert had been accompanied by his own treecat partner for every session with Harahop. And there was the corollary. A telepath who knew someone was lying would make the most effective control for any asset of dubious reliability in the long and murky history of espionage. Harahop might not have minded that, since he entertained no current plan. Unreliable. If he felt more confident about Treecat's sense of self-restraint in the case of any little misunderstanding. that matter, if he believed tree cats were the adorable silken pets they appeared to be. Unfortunately, he believed nothing of the sort. He might not have made a special study of them, but Honor Alexander Harrington's companion Nimitz was the most famous tree cat in history, no small part because of how conclusively he demonstrated that however adorable and silken he might be, he was anything but a harmless pet when his human was threatened. And then there was that name, Clean Killer. Patricia Gibbons tipped back in her chair, rubbing the ears of the tree cat spilled warmly across her lap, while the two of them watched the smart wall display showing the interior of their interrogation room just down the hall from where she sat. At the moment, its only occupants were Antoine Joubert, Pounces on Leaves, and Clean Killer, and she frowned as she thought about why they were here this morning. It wasn't that she really thought it was a bad idea, but Thought Chaser turned his head to look at her, and a true hand smacked the fingers which had paused in their rubbing. She twitched slightly, looked down at him, and he smacked her hand again, narrowing his eyes. Sorry! Her frown turned into a smile, and she started stroking his ears again. His smile grew into a grin as he closed his eyes and buzzed a contented purr. He and she had formed nothing like the soul-deep adoption bond between Honor Alexander Harrington or her husband and their tree cats. There were times she wished they had, when she envied those who'd been adopted. Other times she didn't. She knew Nimitz had represented a very real hurdle, not one that could have derailed Honor Harrington's naval career before it ever began, despite Queen Adrian's rules about tree cats and their people. And she wouldn't have liked knowing that if something fatal happened to her, Thought Chaser would almost certainly follow her into death. But they didn't have that. But if they didn't have that bond, he'd still become what was probably the closest, most reliable friend she'd ever had. And she'd learned to trust his judgment implicitly, at least in most ways. There were human conventions, relationships, societal mechanisms no cat truly understood or probably ever would, though. And she did have concerns about how the species' intrinsic honesty might affect the judgment of someone navigating the murky moral waters of the intelligence community. If telepaths couldn't lie to one another, then how deep an appreciation of human-style dishonesty and deceit could they truly possess? And if the door opened, and Thought Chaser sat up in her lap as she brought her chair upright, Harhop followed his keeper into the now familiar interrogation room, then paused just inside the door as he saw the pair of tree cats parked on the table like matching bookends. They weren't identical, although they had exactly the same coloring and exactly the same grass-green eyes. His was a brain which had been trained to record and file away as much data, even, or perhaps especially, trivial data as possible in a single glance. So even though it would have been difficult for him to consciously catalog all the differences between the two creatures, he was reasonably certain he'd be able to tell them apart if he ever saw them side by side again. The one on the right's Joubert's partner, Pounces on Leaves, he told himself. He found tree cat names a bit odd, but he supposed a telepathic species naming convention would have to be a little strange. So that's Clean Killer on the left. Wonder if those swirls in his fur are from scars underneath it. It was an interesting question, since Joubert had been at some pains to explain that Clean Killer had survived a tree cat mass casualty event during what Mantis called the Yamada strike. He'd also explained how badly the cat had been injured by it. Since Manticore held the alignment responsible for the attack, Joubert had suggested, not at all delicately, it might be unwise for Harahop to say, do, or even think anything that might lead Clean Killer to associate him with the attack. Sounder advice was never given, Harahop decided. He reminded himself that reading an alien species' body language was likely to yield less than reliable results. The Clean Killer, who, now that he thought about it, looked to be at least 20% bigger, Pounces on Leaves, didn't look very happy. Hadn't realized the tree cat's coat could actually bristle, he thought. Alien species or not, I doubt that he's just overjoyed to see me. So this is the evildoer, Clean Killer said. It is the one who used to be an evildoer, Pounces on Leaves replied, and you should not allow your fur to stand on end, younger brother. It is discourteous. Clean Killer flicked his ears and mingled embarrassment and humor as he tasted the dry amusement in the older person's mind voice. Not that Clean Killer was all that concerned about courtesy at the moment. Still, he was supposed to be protecting this two-leg, not killing it himself. He pulled his claws back into their sheath. The bristle of his coat, however, was not a conscious response. He could not make it go away so easily, so instead of trying, he switched his attention to the two-leg. He was not as tall as some of the other male two-legs Clean Killer had seen since volunteering to help guard the people's two legs, but Clean Killer saw with a scout's eyes, recognized the way the two-leg moved. The one who had escorted him here was armed, and he was not, yet Clean Killer sensed that he was actually far more dangerous than she. He was poised, balanced in a way she was not, much as a scout on duty was perpetually attuned to all about him, while he flowed through the netwood, every sense alert for any sign of danger. But that was only the two-leg's outer shell. It was not what truly mattered, and Clean Killer's eyes narrowed as he reached out and delved deep to test the two-leg's mind glow fully and completely. Mr. Harahap, Joubert began. This is Clean. Harahap heard the manticore, but his eyes were on the treecat, as focused as he'd ever been on anything in his life. He saw the furry arboreal. Treecats reminded him of a fusion between a Startman Panthera and a Schimpanzee, or possibly an older bobcat and a lemur, crouched ever so slightly, staring at him closely. You can almost feel the intensity behind those bright green eyes. Clean Killer heard people's eyes, mouth noises, but he ignored them for the moment as he dived into the other two legs' mind glow. There would be time enough. He twitched. His eyes went suddenly wide. For an instant, the entire world stood still, and then he launched himself like a long, sinuous projectile straight at the two-leg. Oh, shit, Patricia Gibbons gasped as Clean Killer hurled himself at Harahap. Both sets of arms opened wide, long, deadly fingers crooked. Damn it, he's been lying to us all along. We need to know, but even so, he's too valuable to let Clean Killer just... Damien Harahap saw Clean Killer coming, and his arms opened automatically. There was no conscious thought in that moment. There was only awareness, and his arms closed again, enfolding that long, slender, impossibly strong body, and cradling against his chest like the most precious thing in the entire universe. Oh, shit! Patricia Gibbons stopped. She realized what had actually happened. Butt chasers obviously decided bleating laughter didn't help one bit. So what do you think we should do about it? If I recall correctly, this was all your brilliant idea in the first place. The Earl of Whitehaven said from his wife's comment, what might not unreasonably have been described as a snippy tone.
Honor says to him, that's the problem. he says, is Samantha ever shy about telling you when she disapproves of something you're doing? Well, no.